So how do you get a grade A on your IB extended essay? Hi, my name is Joaquin Ravello. I'm a current UPenn Wharton dual degree engineering student, and I got a perfect 45 in the IB Diploma back in May 2021 with the exam round. And I make these videos to help students as well as my siblings do well in the IB Diploma. So let's talk about the extended essay in today's video. All right, I did the extended essay in the topic of rocket propulsion. So it's a physics extended essay, and I did mine as an experiment analyzing a very specific problem, or better yet, a very specific research question corresponding to rocket propulsion. And that's what I wrote my essay on. And long story short, I ended up getting an A on this essay. All right, so what I'm going to be doing right now is I'm going to be explaining my thought process behind this, the story behind that, and then I'm going to be going through my essay, the entire thing. I have it open right here on my computer and just giving my commentary about it. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is how I came across choosing this topic, because there's a lot of people, whether in physics or in other topics or in other subjects, who are wondering what's the best topic to pick. All right. I'm going to start by saying that there is no one best topic. Okay. People, for whatever reason, they ask me, is like, what's the best topic? Like, you can literally turn any topic into a level A extended essay. Well, are certain topics easier than others? Absolutely. I'm not saying that every topic is the same in difficulty, but with the correct analysis, with the correct investigation, with creativity, whatever you want to call it, I'm relatively confident that you can turn basically any topic into a grade A. In fact, I was told when I started that this topic was unlikely to work. I was told that it would be very difficult to do. However, I ended up pulling it off and it worked at the end. All right, so a little bit more about how that happened. So I was always interested in rocket propulsion. One of my friends, his name is Peter, he had his own research organization called the Canadian Student Space Initiative, or CSSI. Okay. He has been building rockets, I believe it was 2 years before I ended up joining. So I joined in my grade 10 to 11 year. So when I was in grade 10, I joined, and I think my first experiment that I participated in was in the summer of grade 11 to 12, or grade 10 to 11, excuse me. In that summer, I helped him out, and I really just fell in love with it. It was amazing. I really enjoyed not only working on physics, but also the people around it. Super humbling experience, learned a lot. And if you know me, you know that I love improving my skills, learning, and becoming better every single day. So I saw that as an opportunity to learn more about physics, to learn more about thermodynamics, to learn about more about mechanical engineering. All right, as it be. Long story short, I saw an opportunity for which I could utilize the research that we've been doing, the rocket that we've been working on, and then create my own research project from that and create my extended essay. So that's ultimately what I ended up doing. Note that physics was not my first option with regards to my extended essay. All right, I had a few ideas in math. I had a few ideas in electricity. I don't remember exactly what they were. If I did, I would definitely tell them. I don't remember exactly what they were. Long story short, I remember one of the biggest reasons why I didn't execute on them was because they didn't necessarily make an easy extended essay to write. I found that this topic was relatively easy. And the reason why I thought that was because I could see a very easy way to measure it. I could see a very easy way to write up on it. And because of that, it was more likely that I could have gotten a high marks. Am I saying that I could have gotten a level A with the other topics? Maybe, but it definitely would have been more challenging. And you need to understand that when you're in grade 11 and grade 12, there's a million things that are going on. You're applying to university. You have all of these essays to complete. You have these grades, extracurriculars. It's just a mess of things to do. SATs on top of that. So much things going at you. There's a lot of hard things. So why are you going to choose something that's just going to make your life even more challenging? Okay. So I took a step back. I realized I want to pick something a little bit easier, which in this case was the physics of rocket propulsion, which frankly doesn't sound that much easier, but you'll see in a minute why at least I thought it was a little bit easier to work on. So I started working on my extended essay. I believe it was in May of my grade 11 year. And then I stopped right at the beginning of summer because I had to order in the parts to actually do the experiment themselves. And this is really where things could have gone completely south. If those parts didn't arrive before the start of the summer, I probably would have been screwed. Okay. However, they did arrive on time, and I believe they arrived 1 week before school began. So during the first week of school, I was finishing up the experiment, wrote it up, and then submitted it. I believe it was the second or third week of September. I got my feedback from that. And here's what's very interesting about the story. On my first submission, to my extended essay advisor, I ended up actually getting a C, either a C or a D. Depends on how you interpret the mark boundaries, but I did not do well, to put it lightly. All right, I got a C or a D on my extended essay. Now, there's a few reasons why that happened, and I'm going to get into exactly why in the paper themselves. But from that point moving forward, it basically gave me the kick I needed to refocus my efforts, really rework this essay, and ultimately turn it into something that ended up finally getting me an A by the end of it. All right. Now, I ended up then submitting it again in October, and that's basically where it finished. So if you actually want to see the entire filming process of the experiment and seeing my thoughts of it when I was 17 years old, you can go to the Canadian Student Space Initiative. Search that up on YouTube. You'll get a YouTube channel, which I believe has 1,000 something subscribers. I'm not entirely sure, but if you go to that YouTube channel, you'll actually see a few videos that I made, a few videos that Peter made, as well as vlogs of all of rocket propulsion, as well as the vlog of the extended essay. All right, which is called, I believe it's called Nozzle, something about the Nozzle rocket propulsion vlog. All right, from, let's see, when was this? This was 2020. So September of 2020. Search that video up. You'll see a vlog. Also, if you go on my own channel, you actually go to playlists, you look at archive videos, you can see all my old videos. There's a rocket propulsion vlog on that. You can see exactly what I was thinking. You can see myself when I was 17 years old working through this and giving my commentary at that time, which I think is very interesting because you can then compare and see what I think of it now versus what I thought of it at that time. All right, so that's very interesting. You should definitely go check that out. Without further ado, I'm going to jump right into this right now. So now you should be able to see my two screens. There we go. All right, so a few things first. If we look at my screen right here, I ended up getting a grade A in the 2021 session. I got 27 of the 26 marks. All right, so I was pretty close to the boundary. So it was somewhat of a clutch A, to say the least. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the rubric right here, because whenever it comes to doing these things, whether it's extended essays, IAs, English assignments, whatever the case may be, there's always a rubric for which you need to follow. All right, and I want to point this out specifically because I remember I had a message not too long ago. Someone asked me, what do I do with subjective exams? Right, I believe the person was mentioning English, right? How do I do well in subjective exams such as English? Okay. And my answer to that is very simple. The IB and the SAT as well, and the ACT as well, they're all standardized tests, meaning that they're trying to make it as objective as possible. They're trying to remove any form of personal judgment, any form of opinion in the marking. They're trying to get rid of all of that and then see the work as it actually is. Is it perfect in doing that? Probably not, but it gets relatively close, at least much closer than a teacher at a non-IB school without a standardized process would get. Okay, so that's really the entire point. And by the way, as a side note, when I started doing my SAT reading, and I started looking at the reading passages like this from this objective lens, knowing that there has to be a right or wrong, it made my entire reading much easier. And one of the reasons why they do that is the entire purpose of a standardized exam. Right? The entire purpose of a standardized exam is that I can compare my grade, whether it's an A or a B or a C, I can compare that grade with other students across the world. And I know that that grade level is the exact same. So it actually has a lot of utility. And if everything was subjective, then there's absolutely no point in comparing the grades because they have no meaning, right? There needs to be some type of standardized base. All right. So when it comes to this type of things, you can definitely, quote unquote, game it by just being as subjective and following the rubric as closely as possible. Okay. Does that guarantee you're going to get a high mark? No. But as I'll talk about a little bit later, I did this for my physics IA and I got exceptional results. All right. I ended up getting, I believe, nearly a perfect score on my physics IA. Why? Because I spent, and I'm going to talk about this a little later, but I spent a lot of time working on every single part of the rubric throughout the entire year so that when it came time to write the IA, I wrote it exactly like the rubric would want to. Okay, so do not misjudge the rubric. There's a very clear difference between explain and justify. Okay, there's a very clear difference, and you can ask your IB advisor, between specific keywords in the rubric. Now, I want to bring your attention towards this rubric right here that I have on my side. I'm going to make this actually a little bigger. So a few of the criteria that I did well on in the first time. So this is when I got my level C. The criteria that I did the best on, which my advisor at the time was saying that I got a 5 or 6, was criteria E, which was engagement. Okay. I remember there was some sort of reflections to write. I wrote those in depth. I filmed a video vlogging the entire experience. So you saw that I was engaged in this. This was something that was close to my interests, to my passions, whatever you want to call it. There was evidence that showed that I was engaged with that, which gave me the highest marking criteria. Now, we have criteria A, B, C, and D. This is where I did very poorly. Okay? And one of the reasons why I did very poorly is because I tried adding too much information. And by adding too much information, it convoluted the entire thing, which made it very difficult to understand what's important and what's not, which in hence made it very difficult to understand. Here's the very important part I want you to remember. It made it very difficult to understand how the research question, the main question that I'm trying to answer, it made it very difficult to understand how that related to anything that I was talking about inside of my essay. Whether that was an explanation, whether that was some graphs, whether that was some data, the conclusion or the evaluation or the equations, it made it nearly impossible to understand the correlation between those two. And that alone is why I thought, or why I think, upon reflection, I got a level C. All right, a level C in my first draft. Okay, now I'm actually going to go through my essay right here, and I'm going to show you exactly why I believe that's the case. All right, and let me open this up. So this was my research question. How does the expansion area ratio of a rocket affect specific impulse? All right, so you might be asking, what does this mean? All right, very simply, and this is the only physics I want to explain because frankly, I don't want to spend hours trying to explain to you rockets, propulsion. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't need to be explained in order for me to, I don't need to explain that in order for me to explain my points on how to do well in the extended essay. All right, but I will say this, okay, expansion area ratio. Actually, you know what? I explained it down here. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to show you how my essay explained it. Because you need to remember, this is another big thing to remember. Imagine I'll say that again. The person whose this essay is targeted towards is someone who has the knowledge of physics in the IB. Okay, I believe it was physics SL or physics HL. They have that base knowledge. All right, so you can expect that your audience has that base knowledge. So in theory, if you're in the IB right now and you're doing physics, you should be able to understand this essay. All right, so let's actually try to see if it lives up to that limits test. All right, here's an introduction. This part is not important, except for this right here. 5 nozzles were custom designed and manufactured at different expansion ratios. Okay, this is some research aims, which basically a roadmap. And this is the important part I want to bring your attention towards. I very clearly define exactly what these two terms are. Why do I do that? Because the normal physics reader who has some knowledge of the IB does not know what these are from out of the box, right? They don't know what specific impulse and expansion area ratio means. All right, so that's exactly what I talk about. Specific impulse is a measure of the change in thrust per weight flow area of the propellant MP. This represents the performance, blah, 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 blah. So it's basically a measure of the performance or the efficiency of a rocket, okay? That's specific impulse. Next, expansion ratio. This was very straightforward. It's the ratio of the nozzle exit cross-sectional area to that of the throat cross-sectional area. All right, and if you want to know exactly what I mean by that, this is how a rocket nozzle looks like. You have the throat area and the exit area right here. Okay, and one of the reasons why, if you actually notice, the reason why it's bent like this is because this converging section and this diverging section actually speeds up the gas. It turns a lot of the kinetic energy of the molecules from the combustion chamber, because the combustion chamber, essentially all the molecules in there are hot, right? They have a lot of kinetic energy moving in random directions. When they go out of the converging section, out of the divergent section, out of the nozzles per se, all of that random kinetic energy is turned into one direction. All right, that's essentially, and then you utilize Newton's third law to then create an opposite force that pushes the rocket in the opposite direction. All right. So essentially, the biggest point and the main reason why I'm telling you this right now is this was the biggest mistake I made. I did not define what this word was, or if I did, it was very convoluted. It was unclear. It was somewhere in the middle. It was not explained well. I think that's a better way to put it. It was not explained well to the reader what this meant, what the relation was, and because of that, the entire thing was convoluted. It made absolutely no sense what was going on. And notice how, if you actually go back here, not only is this the first thing I define, so we go here to background research, it's literally the first thing I say. what this is. This is the first piece of research, is the specific impulse and expansion ratio. But I also add this as the title and the first thing they need to understand. Okay? And here's a big thing to understand. If they don't know your research question, if the reader does not understand what this is, like if they can't, if this doesn't make sense to them, you're screwed. Okay, you're absolutely screwed, because how do you expect, if they don't understand your research question, how on earth do you expect them to understand your conclusion? For them to understand your evaluation? It's not possible. So you need to make it very clear what this means. And this is something I failed at colossally at the beginning. All right. And you can actually see remnants of that throughout this research paper. So if we look right here, here's a bunch of information that I had that does not, again, relate at all to the research question, but I just shoved it in there because it made me look smart. And it was just here. It was inside the actual paper. Very difficult to understand what was going on. So I ended it here as an appendix. And then if we scroll down, there's another case where this happens. Let me see if I can find it because it was very entertaining. Yeah. So all of this was part of my essay. Notice how this actually, if you read through this, this doesn't directly correspond to the research question itself and what it's trying to achieve, but it's additional information that might help. My extended essay actually was just full of this type of information, scattered everywhere, very unclear. Okay, I think I made that point strong enough, and I think it's very important for you to truly understand that if you're going to do a research question in, I believe, anything, doesn't matter what you're doing it in, but specifically in physics, if there's not a clear correlation between your research question and what you're talking about, what's important is going to get lost in the mix. Okay, and that's exactly what you don't want to happen. All right, now let's go through this a little bit more. So I talk about, first of all, the most important thing to understand. Then I talk about the propulsion fundamentals, nozzle exhaust flow fundamentals, and a few other things. All right. So the biggest point I want you to take away from this page right here is the word fundamental. Okay. This is how I like to think of fundamental and basic. Fundamental and basic, the way I look at it, is that it simply has a high probability of occurring. Right? If I learn fundamental skills in swimming, if I learn a fundamental swim, that fundamental skill has a high probability of occurring in almost all aspects of swimming in that discipline. Right? So if I learn how to do the front, I genuinely don't know what it's called, but the front swim, whatever that may be called, that likely has a high probability of occurring in all types of swim, similar to any discipline. So when I say fundamental, when I say basic, it doesn't mean easy. It doesn't mean dumbed down. It doesn't mean like basic as in rudimentary or anything like that. All it's saying is that it has a high probability of occurring. And more specifically, the reason why I added it in here is because you need to understand these two concepts in order to understand what conclusion I arrive at. So there again comes the relationship between the research you're doing and your research question and the conclusion you're trying to arrive to. If there's no coherent relationship between those two, and it's all muddled, you are, again, screwed. Now, I make it very clear what some propulsion fundamentals to understand, some nozzle exhaust fundamentals to understand, and then I go into basically understanding the key research that needs to be done. All right. And if you read through this yourself, it should be relatively clear what's going on. Okay. Because I rewrote this probably 12 or 13 times. Now, there's a few things here that, in retrospect, I probably could have removed. For example, I'm not sure if this equation, the converging, actually, I don't think this is completely necessary to have this equation here. But the concepts definitely are. This part right here, very necessary to actually showcase how this all goes together, right? Supersonic, subsonic, and sonic flow, which essentially corresponds to this image right here, which basically explains the key theory as to why I get the results I get. And in theory, my results should look something like this. Okay, if you want to know why this is the case, it's relatively straightforward. If the exit pressure, meaning the pressure right at the end, and that's like right here, if you look at the bottom of my screen, right at the end of the nozzle should be the exact same pressure as the atmosphere. Then essentially, if there's a difference in pressure, you're going to get one pressure starts to push in on the other or starts to pull away from the other, which results in the exhaust gas not flowing directly perpendicular to the rocket. So that's essentially what I show right here, which in turn decreases the amount of kinetic energy that I convert into directly perpendicular gas velocity. So you can actually see this in this curve right here, where the most efficient point theoretically is when the PE is equal to PA. All right, so when that ratio is 1, which makes sense because it's flying directly perpendicular. Okay, that right there is why I chose this topic. And the reason why I chose this topic is because I did the research beforehand and I knew that I would be able to explain the conclusion in a way that makes sense. Okay, I kind of saw this conclusion coming based on the theory. Maybe the experiment was the complete opposite. All right, maybe. But I knew at least in theory I could explain what was happening. This is a big thing most people run into. They try to do something cool and then they have no coherent way of clearly explaining what results they should be getting, right? What their theory should be getting. And I understood this very well when I first saw it, when I first researched it. And again, a lot of this came from, I forgot the name, I think it was Rocket Propulsion Elements, that big textbook. I believe Elon Musk recommended it. So I had it, read a bunch of the chapters there, learned a lot. One of this concept in particular, everything that I learned made the most sense to me. All right, hence I made the extended essay. And you need to understand that this isn't like the most complicated thing I could have done. There's definitely more complicated things, but you don't need to make your extended essay extraordinarily complicated. Similarly to your IA does not need to be that complicated. In fact, my IA was very simple. Very simple. My IA was on measuring how the rate of discharge of a capacitor changes by a resistor. This is like literally the first thing you learn when it comes to capacitors. The first thing. However, I looked ahead at the curriculum. I saw that there was a lot of concepts that we haven't covered. I looked into the one I found most interesting and I talked about that. Okay. Now, here's where we talk more about isentropic flow. So I talk a little bit more fluid dynamics here. Here's some information that I did not need to include. Okay. This was not necessary. Why? Because I already had this value. Okay. I already have this value of gamma, right here. So I did not need to include this equation because there was absolutely no calculation that was being done. All right. This was necessary to calculate. And if I remember correctly, the reason why this equation was necessary, and this is just straight up from so this equation is directly from some of the research. I believe it's a given equation. So so after intensive manipulation, so there's a lot of things I had here. So intensive manipulation means that I basically delete a lot of the information I had because it was just too convoluted, made absolutely no sense. And you can even see some of the notes right here. This equation right here, the reasons why I introduce it is to eventually substitute it into here. Okay, so notice how logically this follows. I introduce this equation. All right, then I introduce this equation. And then I use this equation to derive what I really want, which is this OF ratio, which is the oxidizer to fuel mass ratio. All right, you can find that right here. So I wanted to find what this ratio is because I needed this ratio for something else. I forgot exactly where it goes. I need this equation somehow. Long story short, I derive it. I find that I need this change in the mass flow rate equation. I plug that in, and then I have an equation full of variables that I can measure, and I know. Okay, that's very important. So in other words, and this is the biggest takeaway, everything logically follows from one another. Okay, if there's no reason why it's there, delete it. Now, I'll say that again. If there's absolutely no reason why it's there, just remove it. People try to sound too smart. Absolutely not a good strategy because it did terrible with regards to my grades. Okay, find the expansion ratio right here, calculate this, okay, etc. And then you can actually see, you can literally see right here, all the extra information that I had, a lot of which I deleted. I remember deleting tons of information, tons of extra research, removed all of it because it was not necessary in explaining how my thing that I was working on related back to the research question, okay? This did not, well, this is a fine point. It was not necessary in understanding how this research related to the research question. Okay, and then here's all my information. Now, the biggest note I want to make about this, there's a few things. Number one, I did this exactly like I would with an IA. So if you're good with doing your IA, this is literally what I did. Okay, I followed the normal convention of the significant figures. I did my analysis here with the equation. I just followed exactly what I did with my IA. Okay, I didn't try to invent something new. I didn't try to be smart. I just did exactly what I did in the IA. Why? Because that worked with the curriculum, that worked with the criterion. Okay, with the IA criterion, doing this worked. Doing this got me nearly a perfect score in the physics criterion, So I just did the exact same thing. Okay, is the IA different than the E? Yes. How so? Well, again, it depends on the freedom of investigation that you can do with the E, right? Because I remember I had a friend who did a theoretical one and then he got data from elsewhere. But one of the other big differences is that you have more research you can do. You can add more different parts to your lab report, etc. I literally just did the exact same thing. Okay, I just got the exact same IA structure and I just added extra things in the middle, added extra information here with the theoretical calculations, extra information here explaining the background research. I just added more stuff per se, just made it basically a larger IA. All right, it seemed to work. So again, this is just taken straight out of the IA. If you want to know exactly how I did this, just look at the IB rubric. I followed that to a T. All right, again, talk about following the rubrics. I followed that to a T. All right, and I also did the absolute uncertainties here. So there was a lot of absolute and percentage uncertainties to do. I remember I added this, if I remember correctly, to a appendix. So I'll go through that a little bit later, but I added a lot of these calculations to the appendix instead of this analysis part because it was just too much. Too much example calculations. I remember I had like a page and a half of extra calculations that just made the entire thing illegible. All right. Finally, I got my final graph right here. And then this was the predicted graph. So this is what graph of theoretical specific impulse. Okay, this was the graph of the theoretical specific impulse, what I would expect to get. And then I basically adjusted and I predicted it using a quadratic function. And the reason why I did that is because the actual graph, which looked like this, was not a quadratic function. It was something else, some other convex, complicated thing. So that was something that you can also talk about or what I talked about in my evaluation. All right, here are all my control variables, which by the way, I believe I remember I had a table here. Yeah, so I had a table. I ended up removing it because it was too much. And these were all the control variables that I had. This is important. Remember, these control variables, of course, these are very important, the independent, dependent variables. And if you notice, these came precisely not only from my research, but also from my research question. Okay, independent variable, expansion ratio. That's the first thing I defined. Dependent variable, specific impulse. That's the first thing I defined. All right, these both related to the research question. My equipment list, safety, and then here's the procedural setup. So I made this graphic. Took me a long time to make, especially this this little cube. I remember took me a while to make, but it was clear. All right, and it fit in nicely. It was clean. That's also a big thing about this guy right here, the structure and layout. It needs to be clean. Make sure the fonts are the same. Make sure the size of the tables there's not like half a table on the page. That's actually relatively important. Okay, here's an actual picture of the setup. Again, go watch the YouTube video. And by the way, if you want access to this extended essay, if you want to read this, I only give it to people who watch this content because I know that you're going to get the most value from this. So you can type it in, link in the description. Go to if you type in the Easter egg link down below, if you press on that, you can type in extended essay with a capital E and capital E in the middle. So extended with capital E, no space, essay, no space. Put that in as your Easter egg code and you're going to get access to this PDF document. And then here's some similar calculations. I'm not going to spend much more time on this part right here because this is exactly what you would find in your IA. Okay. And then here's the predicted versus what actually happened. And then I linearize it. All right. And notice that I actually completed the square right here. Why? Because how do you linearize a quadratic equation? Okay. At least that's all I did. I completed the square. Next, conclusion. Exact same thing as the IA. Just copy and pasted that in. Added some more research. Maybe you got to be more precise with a few things. Add some more extra research, extra things to add. But in essence, it was very similar to the IA. And then we had our evaluation right here as well. And yeah, I have filmed the entire thing, which again showed that level of engagement. All right. And then that's all I have for you. Here's the biography, and I want to go through these appendices. All right, so this is where things get interesting. Here are all of the uncertainties that I had originally that just convoluted absolutely my entire analysis. So I added it in here. Again, this probably should have been on a separate page. So again, they probably don't even read the appendices, but it's just good to have, I just did all this extra work. Might as well just keep it somewhere. Next, here's some of the nozzle CAD sketches that I used with Fusion 360. And then some extra research that I removed. Extra research here from from Appendix C. And here's some extra research that, again, did not correspond at all to the research question, but I ended up removing it. So because of that, I ended up removing it because it didn't correspond at all. And this is something I originally had in the first one, and it just made me look smart. Like, ooh, look, I have this equation with a cosine. How smart! I just don't do that. Convoluted the entire thing, made absolutely no sense. And frankly, just reading it right now, I don't see how at all this relates to the research question of, which was again, how does specific impulse change on the what's it called, the independent variable, so the expansion ratio. There's absolutely no way to show any form of correlation, any form of research, anything within this information right here. So don't have it. Long story short. And then these extra points of evaluation, I likely would have added this, but I just ran out of space, or words more specifically. And then there was a bunch of research I also deleted, and that really summarizes it up. I'm gonna go back here. All right, we're at 30 minutes. Wow. So I hope you found this video helpful and a little laggy for whatever reason. That's weird. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions at all, please leave them in the description down below. Again, you can use the code extended essay with a capital E and a capital E. So extended, no space, essay, no space. Put that into the Easter egg link down below, and you'll get access to this PDF for you to read. Hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. Or you can also email me at joaquinr@wharton.upenn.edu. Have a good rest of your day and stay productive. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.